So I'm going to take you from how I went from 0 to a 30 million net worth before I turned 30, showing you being raised in Ghana, growing up on Oak End Road, the poorest place on the Monopoly board, failing at 7 businesses, started a bunch of businesses who didn't quite work, my parents passing away, selling a company, and then eventually being a best-selling author. All right, so where does it start? So it starts on the 8th of October, 1994. I'm born in Hackney, East London. To all my East Londoners, even though I ended up going south, but let's not talk about that. So I ended up being born to 2 wonderful Ghanaian parents. But the truth is, I was the result of an immigration marriage. Now, for those who don't know what that means, my mum is a British citizen. My dad was a Ghanaian citizen. And what they did was that they got married so my dad could get the passport. And so there was a big discussion as to, does this kid go to foster care or how do we take care of this kid? And this picture here is my wonderful grandmother. And my wonderful grandmother came from Ghana to London to see me born. And she saw me and said, no way is this kid going to foster care. I am going to take him to Ghana. And that was the next step here. So before I was 12 months old, I got sent to live with my grandmother in Ghana in a place called East Legon. For my Ghanaians, you know where that is. It's kind of like the Shoreditch or maybe the High Street Ken of Ghana. So it's very nice, it's very cool. And I grew up there for 10 years. And there I learned so many things. I learned, number one, discipline, because for all you British kids and American kids watching this, we actually got hit. We actually would get caned when we did stuff that was bad. At that point, it showed me something. It showed me the importance of the fact that there are consequences for your actions. In some cases, it's positive consequences, and in some cases, it's negative consequences. And I am forever grateful about the fact that I actually got to spend some time in Ghana. I actually got to live in Ghana and see the other side of things. At age 10, what happened was that my parents then decided we should bring our boy back. But not just bring him back and just see how it goes. They actually made a very conscious decision. My mum, God bless her and I love her to bits, made the very painful decision as a mother of 1 child that I should live with my dad. And the reason she made that decision was because she had seen a very important stat that black boys who didn't grow up with a father figure were 4 times more likely to end up in prison. Now imagine for a mother, someone who desperately wanted a child, to then say, for the betterment of that child, he's going to live with his dad and not with me. I'm forever grateful for the sacrifices that my mother has made. And you're probably going to see her in a few of the videos that we do in the future. She's an amazing woman. So then I lived with my dad in Oak End Road. Now, for those who don't know what Oak End Road is or where it is, I'm going to show you here. The poorest street on Monopoly. I don't even know how to play Monopoly, but I know where Oak End Road is. The dead one that you don't actually want. So I live there on the 4th floor council estate with my dad. And I remember going there and being surrounded by things that were very different from Ghana. In Ghana, I had a maid, I had a driver, and then I come here and I realized, oh, things are very different. And that starts to create this sense of, I can do more here. I can be more here. I'm meant for more. By that time, I had started telling myself this story. And it's probably a story that a lot of you guys can empathize with. At some point, you look at your physical environment and you say, I'm not meant to be here. And I remember going up the stairs every single day, going to my 4th floor council estate, because we didn't have a lift, and just saying to myself, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. I don't belong here. It was almost like I was brainwashing myself to believe that I was meant for a different reality. And so during that point, a very pivotal thing happened. At 13, I found this website called Retire at 21. And I would read these stories of these online entrepreneurs who were building businesses, were building empires, and they were making millions. And I used to think, hang on a sec, these guys are no different to me. In fact, one of the phrases I love, and it's an African saying, is, do they have 2 heads? Is that you look at someone doing something and you say, hang on, that person is no different to me. And that's what I told myself. So at 13, I decided that the way I was going to try and get out of my environment was actually to build businesses. At that age is when I started my first ever business. At 14, I started business, which is a tutoring company. And I'm going to show you what happened in that business because it's a very critical lesson for entrepreneurs, but also people who are striving. So that business was because of a bet with my friend Kunal. Now, Kunal and I were walking back from school and we saw this black Mercedes Benz. And he looked at me and he said, how much do you think that cost? Remember, I'm a 14-year-old kid growing up in ends. I don't know anything about money. So then I say, £500. Because to me, that might as well have been £5 million. And then he says the words that changed my life. He says, I bet you wouldn't see £500 before you turn 18. And he said that not as some kind of like, I don't believe in you, but if anything was the inverse. It was, I believe in you so much that I'm putting down this bet for you to then beat it. And so I go online and I literally search how to make money. Now, I don't know if you remember over 10 years ago when you search how to make money online, hella scams, hella course bros. If you think the course bros now are a lot, think 10 years ago, everyone is trying to sell you the dream. Everyone is trying to just get some money from you. So I looked at all these people who are charging me $997 for their course to suddenly have internet money. And I said, well, I don't have the $997. That's the reason why I'm coming to you. But I did see a quote, which was work with what you know. And on that day, we just finished a math test. And I had scored the highest on that math test. And I said, well, work with what you know. What do I know? I know math. So I am now going to tutor people in math. And so the next day, this is again a big lesson, which is action, action, action. The next day, I started my first business, which was Tim's Tutors, also known as Alpha Tutoring to the parents to be more official, but really it was Tim's Tutors. And then I started that business and I just went to people and I said, do you want to also get the best grades at maths? They said, yeah. And then I said, all right, I'm going to charge you £10 an hour. And I was in business. Suddenly I had a business. And then what happened was people would come to me for physics, for chemistry, for biology, things I wasn't that good at. And what would I do? I would say, who else is good at this? And I will go to the teachers of each of those subjects and I would say, hey, who scored the highest on your last exam? And they would tell me. And then I'll go to those people and I'll say, yo, you want to make some peas? And they'll say, yeah, of course I want to make some peas. And I'll say, sweet, come into my network and I will connect you with other parents and I will take a cut. And then I got into my first scaled business, which is being a middleman. You're gonna notice a pattern across all my businesses. I have never invented anything original. I am a shameless middleman. I connect two people and I take a cut. This is another big rule in business. You don't have to be an original inventor. This is something you'll notice in a lot of my businesses. I have never invented anything original. What I do is that I look where transactions are happening and then I either build a platform or a service so that I can take a percentage of that value. So that first business, I was the middleman. What happens when you have a tutoring business when you connect a tutor to a student? Within 6 weeks, I had grown to 65 tutors and I was taking a cut every single time a lesson was happening. And then my cut started to go down. And I'm like, bro, what's happening? And what was happening was that these king teachers were going behind my back and they were just working directly with the students. And so that business failed. But what did it teach me? It taught me that I could actually just magic money. I could think of an idea and I could put it out into the world. You see, now as someone who has accomplished a lot, I guess, in business, people look at me and say, you know, how did it feel making that first million, that first 10 million? And I go, well, you know what? It's cool, but the most impactful thing was that £5 cut that I made when I connected two people at 14. That was the moment that I realized that this was something I could do. I could think of an idea, put it out into the world, and people will pay me for it. I had now got my first taste of entrepreneurial excellence, and I was going, all right, this is interesting. At this point, I want to invite another lovely lady into my life. And that lovely lady is Miss Shabaki. She is my English teacher. When I was 16 years old, Miss Shabaki took me aside and she could see that I was entrepreneurial, but also I was, being surrounded in Oak Road. I was kind of going down a slightly different path. And she said to me, Timothy, you're a smart guy. You know you can be the best you can be. And I remember when she said that, it changed my life. Because what that was the first time someone externally from my parents had given me high expectations and had told me that I could be the best version of myself. And we probably all have that story. A teacher, a friend, someone who sees much higher for ourselves than we do. So at that point, I had told myself, I am someone smart. I can figure things out. I remember I had the evidence that I could think about a business and put it out into the world and people will pay me for it. That then led me to my next business I started at 17. So I loved business and I thought, well, maybe other people also love business. Maybe I could build a business out of teaching people business. Crazy. So think about things like entrepreneur.com or Business Insider. It was just an online publication all about business. And my whole idea was that if I could create a website, interviewing entrepreneurs, getting their insights, then a ton of other people would also want it and I could build a business out of that. Which now you see so many people doing that. You go, nah, bro was ahead of his time. I didn't even know what I was doing, to be honest. I just thought maybe there's a business in building a community of people who also love business, and then they could then get advertisers like lawyers and accountants to advertise to them. So I then started entrepreneurexpress.com. And that was actually both an online magazine and an offline magazine. And I had the offline magazine and I contacted universities and sixth forms who would take the print publication. And I thought, great, these guys are gonna love it. I called up all of them, they all said yes. And of course they'll say yes, it's free. But here's what happened. About 2 months before we had to then deliver the magazine, I realized that to sustain the magazine, I needed to sell print advertising. Remember, I was a 17-year-old kid at that point. I had no clue how to sell print advertising. My brain was so excited by potentially creating this amazing magazine that I forgot how on earth do we turn this into a business. And so for a month, I was contacting a bunch of law firms and accountants to advertise in it. And the truth was, I wasn't that good at selling it. And they all basically said no, apart from one person who gave us £400. But come on, that wasn't going to do anything. So that offline version failed. So I turned all my attention to the online version of the business. And what I did is something that transformed the way that I do business going forward. I leaned into my competitive advantage. So imagine this, my competitors are Business Insider, entrepreneur.com, Forbes.com, the big boys. And they are driving traffic through SEO and Google Ads. They're getting millions and millions and millions of people. And I'm just there with my small website thinking, how do I get people? And then I realized something. I was very good at being able to grow Facebook pages. So I was in a group chat with a lot of the people now who run some of the biggest pages. And what we do is that we'll create pages around motivational videos, you know, the Gary Vaynerchuk, the Tony Robbins, because those Facebook pages have millions and millions of followers. So what if I took articles from my site and then I put them into the Facebook pages, and that would be the thing that drives the traffic. And I tested it with one page and instantly we had 10,000 clicks to the website. And I went, hang on a sec, I think we've got it. Because those people like Forbes and Business Insider and entrepreneur.com and inc.com, those guys were these massive companies who didn't understand Facebook. They were just used to Google search and SEO. And that was an edge that I could win. I would take articles and I'll write articles about business, entrepreneurship, or interviews that I've done. I would then put those articles into the Facebook pages, and that would drive people back to my website. I'd grow my email list and I would just grow my community in that way. And then now I had hundreds of thousands of people coming to my site. And then I'd go to advertisers and say, do you want hundreds of thousands of people seeing your product? And of course they say yes. And that became my distribution model. You see, there is a lesson in there to lean into your competitive advantage. I could have started that business and said, how do I do SEO? How do I do Google Ads in the same way like my competitors did? Rather, what I did was I said, well, I know Facebook. I'm also young, so I understand how this young audience use social media. Why didn't I combine those two things and then use that as my moat? So this story, however, actually ends in a pretty good way. So I remember it was a November and I get this email from someone. It's from a company called Horizon Media. And I get this email from them and they say, hey, we'd like to partner up. And I don't know what that means. Let's get on a Skype call. So he says, before the call, I'd love for you to share over your stats. So I share this email with him, sharing our traffic sources. But then the most important thing, accidentally, I also say, and the way we grow traffic is through these Facebook pages. And I put a list of all these Facebook pages. And then we get on the call. And I remember he says the words that changed my life. He says, hey, rather than partnering up, why don't we just buy you? And I remember as a 17-year-old kid in that South London council estate with my dad, wearing my red Man United shorts and saying, what the fuck do you mean? And he says, yeah, I think you know how to drive social media traffic. We don't. So therefore we'd like this asset and we like the Facebook pages. And you know, I'm trying to act all, yeah, you know, that's so interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. But my legs are shaking. And then within 2 weeks, we agree and he buys the site for £110,000. And I remember thinking, wow, I had just worked on this website for 11 months. And in 11 months, I'd gone from no idea to then selling a business for 110,000. And I went, oh my God. And I think for so many entrepreneurs, these are the moments that shape you. These are the moments that make you who you are. It's not about the amount of money. It's about the person that you become making that money. It's about the fact that I decided at 17 to start a business after having a failure in the tutoring business, and to go again and again and again. Now, at this point is where you're probably thinking, oh, so bro had one success and then he just had success after success after success. But that is not true, because the world has a very interesting way of telling you to humble yourself. So after that, I started a bunch of businesses and 7 of them failed in a row. I started a charity gifting platform, completely failed. I started an affiliate site for dentists, completely failed. And I even started a Christian clothing line, and that failed. Even God said, nah, bro, this one ain't for you. But eventually, here is what happens. I started a business called Banzi. Now, Banzi is a complete ripoff of a company in the US called Prizeo. And what they do is they'll do these amazing celebrity experiences. So for example, you could buy Justin Bieber merch, and what would happen is that would give you a raffle in order to then go and hang out with Justin Bieber backstage. And I saw that company was growing incredibly fast. I saw that it was also raising money. And I thought, cool, I'm just gonna copy the exact thing. It's working in the US. I'm just gonna do it in the UK and see what's gonna happen. It didn't work because I then emailed a bunch of these artists and these bands, and the truth is, in the UK they just have a different appetite to these sort of things. In the US you can do these amazing experiences, but in the UK they're a lot more conservative. But I did email one songwriter. It was also a YouTuber, and her name was Kira Rose. And Kira Rose, we did this amazing experience with her, and the idea was her fans could buy merch and go into a amazing experience at Go Ape. Now, for those who don't know, Go Ape is like an outdoor tree climbing activity place. It's quite cool. So I contacted Go Ape and I was expecting them to give us a freebie. So I get on the phone to the social media manager who still works there now, Dan Bell. Shout out to Dan, by the way. You changed my life. Love you, bro. So I get on the phone to Dan and I say, Dan, we'd like to do this experience. We'd like to bring Kira Rose. She has 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. And then Dan says, cool, how much? And I remember in that moment, my brain just went, oh, I'm an absolute donut. The business is not getting fans to buy these experiences for like 50 pounds, buying t-shirts of their favorite artists and bands. The business is going to brands like this and saying, hey, we have this massive YouTuber with 50,000 subscribers. Do you want to get her to promote your brand? You can charge way more for that, and it's way more valuable and it's way more needed. They're seeing it as a marketing expense. And I remember just my small brain going, yeah, 300 pounds. Because to me, all I wanted was just to get the deal. And Dan said, sure. And I remember then saying to my 2 co-founders, Ambrose and Mitchell, and I remember saying to them, guys, new business. The new business is pairing up these brands with these influencers. And that then became Fanbytes. Now, again, at this point, you would think, wow, amazing. And then they grew the business and it became really successful and everyone just lived happily ever after. Again, remember what I said, life has a very funny way of just smacking you in the face. And in this way, it didn't just smack me in the face, it absolutely grabbed my neck and choked me and dragged me to the floor and said, now are you gonna get up? And the way that it did it was through the passing of my dad. When I was 21 years old, we're having some work done around the house. A man came to fix a boiler and he asked me to get something signed by my dad. And I go into his room and I see him still on his bed. And I instantly freeze because at that point, I realize what has happened. And I go and I'm trying to touch his body. I'm trying to pump his chest and it feels very cold. It feels very hard. And I realize, oh my God, my dad's gone. And anytime I talk about this, I talk about a very specific experience, which was when I called my mom and I did not cry. And then I called my dad's siblings and I did not cry. And then I called my co-founder, Ambrose, and I started crying like a baby. And the reason why I started crying like a baby was because just shortly before my dad had passed away, Ambrose's dad had also passed away. So what happened was in that moment, we realized that we're these 2 Ghanaian kids who were trying to make it with no father figures. Now, I'm not saying everyone should go through that. I wish that on absolutely nobody. But the level of intensity and hunger and drive that gave us was so immense because to us, Fanbytes was no longer just a business to have some impact in the marketing niche. It wasn't just a business to make money. It was a business to make our fathers proud. I was 21, Ambrose was 22, my co-founder Mitch, our CTO, was 19. And that level of intensity and hunger and drive drove us to the next level. And when we say push us to the next level, I mean really next level. Starting from our bedrooms in our university, I went to Warwick, Ambrose went to Imperial, Mitchell went to Nottingham. We grew the company from just us three to a team of 80 people, working with the world's biggest brands like Nike, McDonald's, Samsung, Deliveroo, the UK government. We raised 2 million in funding, just absolutely blitzed the entire marketing industry. And then in 5 years, we get an email. We get an email from someone who is interested in strategic partnerships. That's the way that it always is. And then the next week we get another email. And then I say to my co-founders, guys, I think it's time. I think it's time that we look at exits in the business. So we appointed a bank. The bank ran a process. We had 3 companies put in multi-8-figure bids. And eventually we sold the company to Brain Labs in a multi-figure all-cash deal. I was 27 then. So the reason I share this video is simple. It's because I want to humanize the people that you see online that you put on a pedestal. When you look externally, you go, oh, he started this business, then he sold this business, then he sold this business, and he's Forbes 30 under 30, and he's Sunday Times bestseller. All that is fine. All that is cool. But the truth is, it was a crazy journey.